we'll be ready to go. So we've got a pretty good variety of things to talk with you about today. A lot of classic dungeon stuff, as well as a little bit of a preview of some things we're planning for our first major content patch, 4.1. But first thing we wanted to get into is a little bit of a talk about some classic heroics. This is something that we've introduced for Cataclysm that we're really, really hyped about. And it's basically the concept of taking a dungeon that we know players enjoy and love. It's something they've been playing at this point for almost 6 years, and being able to turn it into something completely new that players can experience in Cataclysm. And in doing that, there's a number of things you have to do to make that actually come out good and feel like something that's really different, and not just taking it, you know, upping the HP of some of the creatures, swapping out a few things. Instead, we looked at this in a way that we could actually get a chance to basically redo the dungeon from the ground up, but keep all the flavor and all the things about the dungeon that players really like. So the dungeons we did this with for Cataclysm are Deadmines and Shadowfang Keep, and I think those are two fan favorites. And part of the concept here is not to just take the encounters and make them different and add new stuff, but we also wanted to make it feel like it was part of the world. So not only are you going to see new bosses and new creatures throughout the whole dungeon, you're also going to see new quests that are in these dungeons as well. And we really think it kind of adds a new level to the dungeon as a whole. So you're not just going in there, like you might run through the LFD tool and get queued up into the dungeon. And you're going to have a whole experience. It's not just going to be running through, killing a few bosses and jamming through. We've changed it now for all the dungeons in Cataclysm that the quests actually appear inside the dungeon right at the front. I imagine there's a lot of people here that remember doing the Nexus and showing up at the front door and realizing you had a giant quest chain to get done before you could go in. And this is something we obviously noticed as the developers, and that we wanted to get fixed too. So that's something we've got taken care of for not only all the new dungeons in Cataclysm, but all the classic dungeons all the way back have that feature. So kind of speaking to the character of the dungeons, we really wanted to make these places feel like they were a part of the world. And the best way to do that is to involve them in the storyline. And so with these two dungeons, we're kind of in a situation where it works out perfect, because in Silverpine, Shadowfang Keep kind of fits that role just right. You worked your way through the zone, and it kind of works out well as the climax. Obviously, Deadmines works the same way. You've seen us do a little bit of this in some of the expansions. We've done this before, like at Gundrak, kind of at the end of Zoldrak, as like that final dungeon you get to where you accumulate the story, finish it off. You could look at Stratholme, kind of similar in Eastern Plaguelands. And that's something we wanted to do here. We really wanted to carry that story through. So the bosses that you see in these dungeons, you're actually going to interact with on the quests while you're playing through the zone. And we just think that gives the dungeon so much more of a flavor and a reason why you're doing the dungeon. You're not just going through it to earn your justice points. You're going through it to actually finish the story and complete the quests that you're working on. So finally, along the way we were doing this, originally, as you know, we kind of announced these as a heroic only thing. We were going to do a heroic level 85 version for Deadmines and Shadowfang. But along the way, we ended up changing so much stuff that now the normal versions are basically updated as well. So it's kind of a feature that's going to go out for everyone. And you're going to see different bosses too. In Deadmines, you end up fighting a different boss in the heroic version than you do in the normal version. So now we got a couple screenshots just to give you guys a little sneak peek. Both of these places are available in the beta, so some people might have seen this stuff, but I know there's a number of people here that haven't been able to play in the beta. So here's Lord Godfrey, our new final boss for Shadowfang Keep. And then here's a picture of Vanessa Van Cleef. So a few things might have changed in Deadmines. Can't wait for you guys to get in there and check it out. So we did have another thing we wanted to talk about along the lines of classic dungeons. Now, we took these two dungeons and upgraded them into heroics. Now, the layouts for those dungeons remain the same. So when you get in there, they're going to feel familiar, but obviously have a completely different style of gameplay. We also wanted to go back and look at the classic dungeons and find a way that we could take some of these dungeons that we feel like might be too long, they might be complicated, they don't really feel the way that we feel the quality of a dungeon that we would put out these days would feel like. So we're looking back at some of the classic dungeons and trying to find ways to make them better. One of the goals would be to make these less confusing. And we've got a couple examples here we can show you. Separate from that, we've also got some dungeons that are really long. Try to do all of Meridon and see how, I mean, now granted, nowadays when you're leveling up, if you go back, it can be quicker. But for a new player, a dungeon like this is really, really long to get through. Something like Oldemon, you can die very close to the final boss and have a long run to get all the way back. And no one likes having to spend that time doing those kind of things. Above all, we want to make these dungeons more fun. So we've got a couple examples and a couple different ways that we do this stuff, and we want to go through that with you today. Now, we got some of these changes are going to be in Cataclysm that you're going to see on ship. We actually were able to get a few changes in on some of the dungeons. A large number of the things we want to do, we're planning to ship with our first big patch for Cataclysm, patch 4.10. So as far as the methods, the biggest thing we want to do is create wings. Now, this is something you guys have probably seen all throughout WoW. If you look at Scarlet Monastery, we've got wings. So players can kind of pick up like a bite-sized chunk of a dungeon and say, I want to do this part right now, but I don't want to go through the whole thing. We've obviously done this moving forward. You saw this in Burning Crusade, in Northrend, with Utgard Pinnacle, Utgard Keep. We kind of have two wings that share the same style, but the dungeons are different. But if you imagine trying to play through Utgard Keep and Utgard Pinnacle together, that's kind of what we're looking at for some of these classic dungeons that are in WoW now. So breaking them up into wings is something that's going to feel really good to most players. So here's an example. Here's Oldemon. Classic. So this is how Oldemon looks now. This is a top-down view of the whole dungeon. You can see down there in the bottom right is where you enter. You walk in. It's got a huge section. It kind of looks like a maze. So what we want to do is take a dungeon like this and be able to break it up. And we want to find good places to do this. So here we've got a great opportunity with Ironaya. There's this whole event that plays out where you find the staff, you get the staff together, put it in the city, doors open, Indiana Jones moment. Seems like a great place to kind of end this dungeon and have that be the final boss. So you can kind of see here that the dungeon on the right, that's where Ironaya would end and be the final boss. Then on the left side, we would break it out. We've got a back entrance for Oldemon. Out in Badlands, you can come in the backside. Now, they would take that backside entrance and turn that into the main entrance for the second wing, thereby basically taking Oldemon, converting it into a winged situation. It gives us two dungeons that are more bite-sized chunks, easier for players to understand, easier to navigate, and at the same time, we get a chance to go in there and mix up the encounters a little bit and deliver a new experience. Oh, a favorite I see. Am I in the orange section or the green? This might be purple, not sure. So a number of people have gone through Meridon. We've always felt that it was obviously hard to navigate, hard to know where you're at. So this was a great place as an example of someplace we could go in, break it up a little bit, and turn it into a winged dungeon that would feel better for players. So this is what we're looking at to break it up. So we basically kind of changed it into a Meridon living section and then a separate section with Princess on the left side. And instead of having where we have now, where we have multiple instance portals and entrances, we'd break it up, same deal, smaller size bite chunks. Clearly, this would be much easier for someone to navigate and get through. And it's just going to be a better experience for players overall. Especially with goblins and worgans coming in Cataclysm, we figure there's going to be a lot of new people that are going to roll new races and want to go back through obviously the classic world since we just finished redoing all of it. So we want to make sure that the dungeons don't get left behind in this redo of everything. We want them to be up to par with everything else. So creative wings was our first method. We've got another thing here. Oh, scissors. So there might be some other ways to fix things, which might just be to cut them because they just might not have worked out that great. And so we've got a couple examples here of places where we feel like we've got dungeons that could, they could use a little trim, a little nip, a little tuck here and there. Sections that might be too long. It's just areas where